Well, howdy, friends, and welcome to the Roundup podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Tidwell. I have my co-host with me today, Chase Abner. Chase, what's up, man?
Hey, Mitch. Good to be here today.
Man, glad to have you. What have you been doing this week?
Man, I just got back Wednesday from a few days in sunny Las Vegas, Nevada.
Nice. Did you win any money?
I did not. I lost some at restaurants. I had some good food though, man. I ate some Korean barbecue. I had some crawfish. But we were there for a church planting conference with Hope Church.
Okay.
With Hope Church. Vance Pittman's the pastor there, and they have a network called M3, and so it was an intensive. So getting to soak in some good principles about kingdom building over church building when it comes to church planting. It was really good stuff.
Oh, nice, man. Nice. So that wasn't a guys' weekend. That was strictly church business. Okay.
Yes,
Good.
sir.
Just checking on that. Well, man, we're excited to have our guest on today, Chris Millar. If you are a listener of the Roundup podcast, you've heard Chris before. Chris was on with us in December of 2019 as he was preparing. At the time, he was a college pastor at University Heights Baptist Church, preparing to go plant. Again, remember, y'all, this is December 2019, like right before the pandemic. The things that we wish we knew in December of 2019. So we're talking to Chris about preparing to plant. That was actually episode 4. And so we started a series then called Road to Planting, and we want to do a follow-up with Chris saying, hey, we're almost 2 years down the road from you planting a church. We've had a pandemic in the middle of that, so let's kind of catch up. So Chris, thanks for jumping on with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, Chris, tell us you told us about yourself in that first podcast, but just give us a quick snippet for those that may not know you, about you, your family, and just a little bit about your church.
Yeah, so at that time I was a college pastor in Huntsville, Texas, at a church called University Heights that God used to just pretty significantly change my life as a college student there at Sam Houston State. And so in 2019, married to my wife, Ashley. At that time, we had a 3-year-old. I guess, goodness, he was 2. That is crazy. So he was 2, about to turn 3. And we had a 4-month-old little girl named Ella, who just turned 2. And then our son is about to be 5. And so we moved to San Marcos in January of 2020. Kind of that very short story of Path to Planting involved going to a SEND conference with the North American Mission Board, hearing about the SALT Network in Iowa and Resonate up in Washington, sitting next to my lead pastor and my wife, and we looked at each other and said, hey, God's made our church for this. And so in 2018, University Heights cast vision of moving from a church family to a family of churches, with the Well being sent out as the first church plant, with Ashley and I helping serve and lead in that church. And so if only it was as sweet as the SALT and Resonate videos, it would have been awesome. If everything was just 4K drone shots of beach parties and summer projects, then I think I would tell everyone listening, you should plant churches.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it's not always that easy, or that glamorous. But it's been good. It has been good. So I would say, just briefly, it's shocking to think it's been 2 years since then. I would say the 2 biggest things just out the gate. I respect and adore my wife more than I ever have before in my life. I've seen strength in her, resilience in her, care from her in ways that I've just never experienced before from her. And then I also feel more known and loved by God than I ever have before in my life. And a lot of that's through some incredible trials, and not some awesome, exciting church plant start story. But I go, if that's a takeaway from the first 2 years of planting, I'll call that a win. That's a good thing. So,
well, let's get more into just the details of the story if we can, Chris. Take us back to that first quarter of 2020. What was the ministry of the Well before COVID?
Yeah, so transitioning from college pastor to church planter, or lead pastor, was a pretty abrupt shift. And but even in those first few months, I didn't really feel it. In part because we're engaging the campus at full capacity, and we had a pretty set campus playbook that we were running. This was all pre-COVID, so January, February, canvassing campus, doing interviews, like 30-second surveys, throwing parties next to campus, and then spring break of 2020. So March of 2020, brought in 2 different teams. So shout out to the Jameses at Fredonia Hill, and shout out to University Heights for bringing a team with Gavin and them. And they came and brought a team. So we had 60 college students from out of town come in. And the goal was, we're just going to blitz campus, and we're going to reach as many students as we can, and have gospel appointments and throw parties next to campus. So on March 8th, we throw a party at Gumby's, which is a pizza shop right next to Texas State, and say free pizza rolls for 2 hours, like come one, come all, and had 40 new college students come to that party. So we packed out the place. We got like 100 college students total. It's total madhouse. There's like Greeks there. There's like gamers there. There's band nerds there. I mean, the whole gamut of college students. I get 12 dudes numbers that are going to start Discovery Bible studies when they get back from spring break. And then 2 days later, the world shut down. And the president of Texas State literally said, hey, enjoy your spring break and don't come back to San Marcos. Out of those 12 guys, one of them texted me back after that week. And his name's Corey. And he's been one of the biggest connectors in the life of our church for the past 2 years. And so that was in some ways it could look like a car race where the car shoots out and then like a parachute is just pulled on the back of the vehicle and just comes to a really abrupt slowdown. And so at that point, no one knew what was happening. And so it's like, we're on Zoom or we're meeting outside like 30 feet from each other because apparently we could all secretly kill each other with like a cough. And I mean, it was just wild. Like we had no idea what we were doing, but we weren't having Sunday gatherings at that time. And so we didn't have any of that to worry about, but we were having house churches, which is just our small group context. Like we really want that to be kind of the most potent experience of church for people within our body. And so, so we had those meeting, and we went ahead and multiplied into 3 of those back in March. And we're seeing God do awesome things. Like we're still seeing people get connected, and but a lot of that was just network building. Like we're just meeting people. And I would say this is one of the big shifts that I wanted to share in this time, a shift from being a college pastor to being a church planter. What happens in college world, and when I say college world, I mean campus ministry, running some of the standard playbooks. I would say what you can see happen in 72 hours on campus takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months or more in a non-student's life. And so, for example, in March, we met a family in our neighborhood. And actually did like hey, let's meet up on Zoom, and like somewhat like a gospel appointment on Zoom. That was in March or April of 2020. I had my first face-to-face with that husband, like a sit-down meeting, probably 8 weeks ago. And we've stayed connected since then. And so the duration of time that it takes to build a meaningful relationship with a community member, with someone that's not a college student, I've just been dumbfounded at how much longer that takes, especially when they have no context of church life. And so I'm meeting neighbors now that this guy, for instance, his wife served at our kids' camp and led this like dance section of our kids' camp that we did this last summer as a non-believer. And met up with her husband, and he has no clue what the gospel is. He doesn't like, that's just where he's at. But he's now interested and curious about what God's doing. And so, that's blown my mind how much slower church planting is than college ministry. That's been a interesting adjustment of pace.
So, Chris, what are some of the things that I guess maybe you've had to tweak? I mean, obviously, probably expectation on how fast things are going to move, but what are some ways that you've had to transition in your leadership from lead pastor to college pastor to help with some of that, like with that community side of that ministry?
Yeah, I think one of the shifts in transitioning from college guy to lead pastor is a things just go a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I remember even leading through ideas changing. So like there was a point in time where we were talking about perhaps killing our weekly gathering in our college ministry. I kid you not, it took 30 minutes over double days. And the whole table of college students was like, yeah, actually, I think that is a great idea. And it's like, I'm so glad we didn't do that. Like, the weekly gathering landed up being like a helpful thing in our ministry, but that took 30 minutes. Leading change in a church and an organization, specifically with adults, in a church plant, you can get by with it still happening pretty fast, but it takes a lot longer. I mean, you're talking at least a semester or two. And so even group multiplication, what we would do in college is typically a semester. Like you've got a semester and then we're going to multiply and start new groups. And what we're looking at now is like we just plan for like minimum 12 to 18 months before a group has the viability to multiply. Like we were going to start a new group this fall, but then two of the families we're going to send out had babies. And it's a 3 to 6 month recovery in and of itself, just readjusting to life with a new child, as you know, Mitch. And so, yeah, I'd say pace is a huge one, even pace of decision making and change. A second one is I'm surprised at how intimidated I was to share the gospel with adults. That was surprising to me. I'm not sure what that necessarily is, but I felt lots of freedom and confidence in sharing the gospel with college students. Perhaps part of that is because like I've been there and done that. Like I've been through college, but I haven't been through a majority of what some of the adults I'm meeting with have been through. You know, I've got another neighbor who had a very difficult life and kind of a life on the streets and gangs and this kind of stuff. And it's like, man, I haven't been through any of that. And so how do I share the gospel with people who've had experiences that are nothing like mine I've never been through? And so that'd be one thing I'd actually say to like, if you're a collegiate leader listening to this podcast, think of ways that you can increase gospel fluency beyond just college students. And so what does that look like to currently reach your neighbors? What does that look like currently to reach older adults that don't look like you or have the same life experience than you? I think that was something that was a deficit going in. If I could look back to 2019 Chris Millar, I'd say, hey, you need to get reps in while you still can of connecting and sharing the gospel with non-students.
Chris, you've been talking about some of the things that maybe because of your experience in college ministry, you were less prepared for as a church planter. But let's spin that positive. Like, what was it about being a college pastor that befits you as a church planter?
Yeah, I think one of them is, as a college pastor, I did get to share the gospel all the time. And so, like, in my blood is, hey, if we're going to do the work of the Lord, you need to share the gospel all the time. And so there are weeks, not every week, but there are weeks where I am sharing the gospel with someone who is not a Christian and might not even have a Christian framework multiple times a week, which is like some of the most fun for me. And so I think that was one that was very beneficial. Is like just in the DNA of doing collegiate ministry was I'm regularly sharing the gospel, and that has been a huge help and a gift in this current ministry. I would say that the second thing is, as a collegiate leader, like I had to at least learn a little bit about how to plan and organize events. And so that's helped as a church planter. Some of my team might not say that about me, but and like, no, Chris is still not great at leading events. But the third one would be really having a thought through discipleship pathway. College ministry is super clean in that it's a clear cut four-year window of here's kind of our standard pathway of development. And so having a lot of the discipleship engine already built and thought through, it can translate pretty easily into how are we doing that just with church members or individuals, regardless of where they're at in age and stage. And so I would say getting lots of reps in that has certainly been a huge help.
Chris, what has been, you mentioned this a little bit at the very beginning, but how has, like, the course of this last 2 years, how has this affected you just personally? How has this affected, like, your family? Like, what are some of been those biggest changes since planting in, you mentioned that, you feel closer to the Lord now, closer to your wife, but kind of what has led to all that?
Yeah, there's some of that. Like, hey, if you want to hear more about that, maybe shoot me an email. We can set up a time to talk. But painting with some broad strokes, there have been some trials, specifically some relational trials that have rocked us, that have honestly impacted how I relate to people. And there was a window there late last year where my wife would say, hey, I feel like my husband's personality is fundamentally changing. And that wasn't like a good thing. Like, she married this guy that's like joyful and energetic and charismatic and passionate. And I think at the end of last year, a lot of my passion was drowning in pain and trials, and even just beyond COVID and planting in COVID, but some relational trials of people leaving our church. And those were deep waters to walk through. And so by the grace of God and some really good counseling, and a really great network of people, Chase Abner is one of those guys for me. Like, I've had phone calls with Chase that we wouldn't record on a podcast. And like, I'm just raw and sharing, man, this is super hard. And so through those things, like, Ashley just said the other day, like, hey, like, I'm really glad that you've come out of that like your joy is back, your passion's back. But that caught me off guard of, like, there's hard things in college ministry, certainly. My goodness, there's hard things in college ministry. But one of the things we talk about that's a shift between college engagement and then like lead pastoring or community engagement is oftentimes in college world, there's just a lot less strings attached to that individual person. So if a college student makes a terrible decision, like it has some fallout, it has some impact, but typically there's not a spouse involved, there's not children involved, there's not I lost my job and now I can't afford my family involved. And so I think wading through those heavier things has taken a toll just on like the weight of ministry. So then I'd say this, to the like nearness with my family and with God. There were two specific moments where Ashley and I were just beat up, and laying in bed, crying ourselves to sleep, and really crying out to God, like, hey, what if we fold? Like, what if we tap out? And honestly, we joke, like, what if we just moved to Iowa, became a resident, and planted with Saul, and just started over. And it was in that I think the Lord really was doing some foundational work in us. Like, what were we really called to? And that's what, like, I would pause here for a moment. Like, if you're listening to this and you're thinking God might be calling me to plant a church or be a part of a planting team, be really thorough in what God's calling you to. God was not calling us to a specific team or a specific results in light of the ministry we do. God was calling us to a life of obedience lived out in relationship with Him, and for us in a specific place. But that calling was rooted first and foremost in a calling to God. Like we see that in Isaiah chapter 6. Like Isaiah's ministry isn't going to be glorious. It's actually going to be pretty miserable for 60 years. But Isaiah was first and foremost called to obedience to God, not to some glorious, glamorous ministry. And when that ministry got shattered through COVID, through broken relationships, we go, what are we doing here? And it was in those moments that God said, you're following me. That's what you're doing here. That's what I've actually called you to. And all of that work bred a much deeper intimacy in our family and a deeper intimacy in our relationship with God. And those are things that you can't put into a residency, So
that's good. One of my takeaways from the conference I attended this week was when Vance Pittman just really emphasized the point that our primary calling is not to ministry, it's to intimacy.
Yeah.
With Jesus.
Yeah, that's totally right.
And then ministry flows out of having that intimacy with Jesus. And I've been around church planting for almost 20 years now in some capacity, church planting adjacent, of doing college ministry, helping churches, part of young churches, part of Ascending Church, and doing it vocationally now as a church planting leader for, I don't know, almost 5 years, I guess. And so I just want to say, like in Chris's case, Mitch, he's had a hard path. And Chris, I've told you that, there's layers upon layers of difficulty that God has brought your way, that at several points in time, I think he even said, like, man, if you walk away, it's okay. I'm not judging you. Like, I get that this is hard. The thing that I think has enabled Chris and Ashley to keep their hand to the plow, even when things were really thin, and I'm saying all this just to commend Chris, but then also to our audience, the thing that has kept them in this, of course, is Jesus, but it's also the vulnerability and authenticity that Chris carries as a leader, that he has people in his life that he can say things that he'd be embarrassed to say on a podcast, but he will be himself with what's hard. And he's talked about seeing a counselor. Totally recommend that for ministry leaders, especially when you're in a hard season. But beyond that, he's got prayer team, he's got coaches, he's got people that he invites into those hard things, and that willingness just to be completely vulnerable. You're not going to make it in ministry very long unless you have those relationships, and certainly not in a planting scenario where there's just layer upon layer of difficulty and challenge. And so, Chris, just again to commend you, that's what I admire about you, and I think that's been the key to you, keeping your hand to the plow as you have, and to Ashley as well. And so, make sure she listens to this too, so she can hear me brag on her. And even in that, I'm on Chris's prayer team. Actually, I'm on one of them. I don't know. He's probably got multiple, but that intimacy piece is often what he's asking for. So when he's identified a challenge in his life, it's not, take this problem away. It's help me meet Jesus in the middle of this. And so anyway, just love that about you, Chris. It encourages me and inspires me when I get to be a part of that with you.
I would just say, like, hey, I'm incredibly grateful for you and for you, Mitch. But I just make sure I don't have anyone who's like regularly cheering for the Dallas Cowboys on my prayer team, because I don't know if their prayers actually work. But and so
I do appreciate your empathy when they have lost. You do text me and let me know that you care for me.
I work hard at relationship building, but like a lot of guys go like, you need to go build your prayer team, and typically that's part of like ministry partner development, or like, hey. Even like in its worst, it's like brand recognition and like get the name out about your church, but for like future fundraising hopes. But like none of the guys on this prayer team give us any money, and none of them have any like authority in my life to the extent that like they can't fire me, they can't, they're really detached outside of prayer and investment in my life personally from any decision making in the life of our church. None of those guys live in the city that I'm in. And so that's just been like, man, have a prayer team where you really can be like freaky honest. We're not talking like a newsletter prayer team. I'm talking like They're like your special weapons and tactics prayer team. And so just a side note on that prayer team thing, like Chase isn't on like a newsletter prayer team. He's on a group of 7 men that I text any hour of any day. Hey, if you don't pray, I don't know if we'll make it. He's on that prayer team, and you need one of those. And so
that's good, man. Chris, I think one of the things I really love about you as a leader, and I think I know you're still early in on church planning, but your ability to surround yourself with men and women that have the ability to speak into your life and shape you, and just your humility and that. So, man, super, really appreciate that about you.
Thanks, man.
Chase, is there any other question you have for that, or is there, or I have another question I was going to ask about, maybe some advice he may give someone, but I didn't want to jump before if you had something else you had there.
No, I just wanted to brag and encourage Chris. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, Chris, think about this. Like, if you could go back to Chris Millar, December 2019, what advice might you give him as if you're just that older guy as you're walking into that 2020? What would you say to Chris Millar in 2019?
I think one of the things I would say is be even slower to call people leaders.
That's a good word.
And I'll tell you, man, when you're planting a church, you are desperate to call people leaders. And you think, if I call you a leader, people are going to follow you. And you're investing, you're sharing authority and power, honestly. And titles do mean things. And I mean, I'd just be like way slower to do that. If you're going to call someone a pastor in your church, like, you better think long and hard about that. Yeah. You better have some other people speak into that. If you're going to call someone a house church leader, if you're going to call if you're going to give them leadership, perhaps a helpful thing, like, hey, if I'm going to call this person a leader, what would happen if they stopped leading, or if we needed to ask them to stop leading? What would happen in that context, and how would they respond to that? And some of that you just can't know. Yeah. But I think I would tell Chris Millar in 2019, hey, you better slow down, boy. And don't empower people just because of need. So in that, I would say, like, people talk about in hiring, you got to talk about character, competency, culture, and chemistry. I would say, like, if you were putting percentages on those things, if competency is getting like 20%, character in my book now is probably getting 65 to 70%. And because you can train in character, I mean, you can train in competency. Character, it's a lot harder to train in. And so my wife hates it when I say this, but I say, I'm probably not going to invite someone into a high level of leadership until I've watched them bleed. And she just hates the saying, but I go, until I've really seen you suffer and watched how you respond to suffering and pain, I'm just not going to really know, like, what kind of leader you actually are. And so that would be a huge one. Character over competency, and be way slow to call people leaders in your new context.
That's good. That's real good, man.
I think if I was throwing out another one, plan ways that you're going to have fun with your team. I'm not great at that. But like Mitch the other day, like, we had a Roundup meeting, and we, I guess not the other day, it was like a year and a half ago now. And I mean, like, 6 of us went and did this virtual reality thing in Austin. And that was so life-giving and energizing, and we still joke about it regularly today. So that was with, like, John Molina and Chris Cummings and you. It's like, man, that was, like, I feel so close with them. But it's so easy for ministry to just become hard relational work, hard organizational work, results driven, mindless, like just put your head in a wall kind of work.
Yeah.
And I would tell 2019 Chris, hey Chris, I know you're not great at this, but you need to get some muscles in how to have fun with your team. Like just party with them. And so like we went camping with one of our other pastors the other weekend, and it was like, why don't we do this regularly? Like this is so good to just slow down and have fun together. We just did a college young adult camping trip. And sure, that's part of our like little organizational playbook on reaching the campus. But Ash and I went with the kids, and it was just like we're just here to have fun. Like I'm not leading anything. We're just playing, and that stuff is life, and it goes a lot further than you might think.
And that is 1,000% true. I've always, in fact, that was like a Kindig matrix I think he taught one time with family.
Oh, Scott Kindig, what a guy!
Yeah, purpose and play, man. Just do things on purpose and then have fun while you're doing it, and that does breed just an intense amount of community. And I will never forget that virtual gaming experience. That was so fun, so hot, and it was incredible. And I was deeply. We had our last Roundup meeting. Lead team meeting there in August, and several people bounced. Yeah, man, I don't know. We'll have to get our act together for that for sure. Yeah,
that's good. Even just hearing you guys talk about the play and the fun aspect of being with your team, it comes back to the kingdom, right? The already and the not yet. Yeah. And when you're planting, you see yourself as a missionary. You really focus on the not yet of the kingdom, and so you default towards being a laborer. Mm-hmm. But you got to remember the already of the kingdom, which means you're a feaster. You're a you sit at you sit at a table with the people of God, and so man, may we have more of both in our respective worlds. Yeah,
that's a great word.
Yeah, good stuff. You want to land the plane, Mitch?
I will. All right, Chris. You know, we have listeners on here, maybe college pastor, college minister, student. What advice may you give them if they're wrestling with, hey, I think the Lord may be calling me to become a part of a church plant one day in the college context? What wisdom, what advice might you give that person?
Yeah, I think a couple things. And I've had this opportunity even recently. We actually have a guy that just became a part of our church and that moved to San Marcos with the dream of planting. And so I would say, like, this guy's doing what I think I would encourage is like, hey, just go be a part of one. Go check it out, see what it's actually like. But I would say this, and I'm not knocking the incredible videography that some of these churches crank out. This was my own brokenness meeting things that are happening in the world around me. Okay. I think I watched those videos, specifically like Salt and Resonate videos. Gorgeous work, incredible. And I went, wow, we're going to do that. And it's going to be amazing. And now actually the SBTC, like we have our own video. But I can tell you stories of people in that video that are not glorious, that are not amazing. And I think I wish I had sat with more planters and spent time with them, like actual time, building relationship with them that could have given me a bigger dose of realism instead of romanticism. I would say a little bit, Mitch. And so if there's like one cultural piece of what we're doing here that I'd critique a little bit, I think we over romanticize church planting. Just a pinch. And again, most of that's my own brokenness, just attaching to things that are happening around me. But I think there's a bit of over romanticism that we feel so desperate to recruit planters that we've got to paint it as this like really attractive thing. But if that's the attractive thing, then when the planter lands and the attractive thing is actually like feels like a harlot, then what is the planter left with? And so I think it's important for us to think through like, hey, how do we actually give a deeper calling to God, a deeper calling to intimacy? And from the overflow of that place, say, like, now here's a like biblical call to reach people who've never heard of Jesus before. And if you can plant from that place, man, I think your ministry is going to be sweeter and richer, and probably actually like more fruitful in the long term. And so, man, like, and then you'll just watch God do things that you never could have orchestrated. So like, I know I've said, hey, things have been hard, but like, just to praise the Lord for some things He's done. We planted a church because Ash and I feel personally compelled. They're like, there are people in this world who have no access to the gospel. And we think the piece that we play in that puzzle is planting collegiate churches to reach students to help send them long-term overseas to go share the gospel with those folks. That happened 6 weeks ago. We sent our first long-term goer who's going to go overseas to an unreached people group to plant a church and share the gospel. We did not do that. Like, that wasn't because of our playbook. And so that was because a sovereign God is orchestrating a work that He's invited us to be a part of. Okay, this is not a preaching podcast. I get off the storytelling, but like, man, I think don't over romanticize it. Like, there are beautiful parts of it, but those beautiful parts are really found in the nature and character of God. And then like the beautiful redeeming work that He does in the body of Christ. And so don't over romanticize it. 2, if you're a collegiate leader right now, here's 2, and you're thinking about planting. I think this should actually be a prereq. So in our sending church, I was like celebrated as a multiplying disciple because I helped start a small group. It multiplied and multiplied again. And so like in total, we probably had a reach of like 40 different people plus in about 2 years. Not one of those people was from outside of our church. They were just disconnected church people that were coming on Sundays. And we're just populating groups. I would say a prereq for a planter is, man, you need to practice right now starting groups from nothing. Like, no one in your church, currently connected to your church, you need to practice reaching lost people solely through meaningful relational investment. And like that, I think that's a growth area for like the whole church. But specifically, if you're a planter, that's a rep you need to have. So I'd go, man, like press hard into calling and really sort through, like, am I being called to God in like a deeper pursuit of God, or some like over romanticized picture of my life and a results-based ministry? And then like, how are you getting reps in gospel fluency among lostness that oftentimes a busy church staffer has zero time for? They're like, you're too busy doing all the church things to go actually reach lost people. Like, you're empowering other people to reach lost people, but like, that's going to be your job. And you got to have some reps in that. So those would be some things.
Chris, so good, man. I appreciate you jumping on. And I think, man, I think the theme that I've heard across this whole podcast is just intimacy with Christ is numero uno, like main thing.
Yeah.
Because even in the good days and in the bad days, man, that's what you stay clean to. And I love, the fact that, the reason why, I'm so passionate about helping and resourcing churches to plant churches is I believe the best way to reach people is through planting churches, because in some ways you can't get away from evangelism. And to grow a church, you have to reach people. And one of the things is, like, if you're not willing to, as a college minister, if you're not willing to get to know lost people and begin to create a community among lost people and sharing the good news of Jesus, like, it's just going to be really hard to plant a church if you don't know how to connect with lost people, at least an effective church. So, man, great wisdom, great word. Chase, anything you got for Chris before we land here?
No, man, just keep on and come see us in Iowa as soon as you can.
Hey, well, I heard there's some deeper partnerships between NAM and the SBTC, so I'm just believing that means more Chase Abner in Texas.
Hey, I hope so.
Yeah.
I've been looking for houses around here for them, so I found one down the street here.
There you go.
It could be my winter home. I can winter in Texas.
Hey, it would be a great winter home, man. It's about 60 degrees here. It's awesome. So.
Yes.
Oh, man. Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks so much for your time, bro. And then,
thank you guys.
we'll look forward to keeping up with you.
Awesome.
All right. See you, man. Friends, thanks for listening to the Roundup podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we now have a YouTube channel where you can watch the video of it too. So don't forget to subscribe there. Follow us on social media at SBTC Collegiate. You can stay up to date on all of our podcasts, blogs, any kind of resources that we put out. So, friends, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.